Hey, so glad you got here. We were totally waiting for you, just about to listen to a story about a city where the sound of bells was never a warning, where travelers slept a little easier after crossing the gates, and where the shadow circling overhead was considered better luck than a pocket full of silver. Strange place, really. Most folk run from dragons. These people worried only when they didn't see one. Rather like missing the village baker. You don't appreciate him until breakfast becomes considerably less exciting. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, leave a comment telling everyone where you're listening from and what the local time is where you are. It's always amusing to imagine this tale, drifting across distant lands at all hours, carried as quietly as evening mist. Now settle in, get comfortable, and just relax. Today's tale starts like this. There was once a man named Aldrin, a keeper of records, whose greatest talent was remembering things everyone else had forgotten. He was not a knight, though many assumed every worthwhile story required one. He carried no enchanted sword, owned no magnificent horse, and possessed exactly the sort of shoulders that suggested years of lifting books rather than shields. If danger arrived, Aldrin's first instinct was usually to locate a sturdy wall and think very carefully. Oddly enough, this habit had kept him alive. The road wound through rolling green hills, where sheep grazed lazily beneath drifting clouds. The air smelled of damp grass and pine resin, while distant rivers shimmered like ribbons of polished steel beneath the afternoon sun. For 3 weeks, Aldrin had traveled toward a city called High Hearth, not because its markets were famous, not because its walls were mighty, because of a rumor. Every tavern between the northern forests and the southern marshes repeated it in slightly different ways. High Hearth had never fallen, not once. Invading armies disappeared. Bandits avoided nearby roads. Even wolves hunted elsewhere. The explanation never changed. A dragon watched over the city. Most people laughed after saying those words. Then they glanced toward the mountains, just in case. Now, dragons filled countless songs, naturally. In some they demanded impossible treasures. In others, they kidnapped royalty, which always seemed terribly inconvenient for everyone involved, especially the royalty. This dragon did neither. It asked for nothing. That was what troubled Aldrin. People always wanted something. Kings wanted taxes, merchants wanted profit, priests wanted faith, cats wanted absolutely everything. But a dragon protecting strangers without reward? That made no sense. Which meant there had to be a story. As evening settled across the valley, Aldrin climbed the final ridge before High Hearth. He stopped. Below him stood a beautiful city surrounded by broad stone walls, glowing amber beneath the setting sun. Narrow streets curled between rooftops, smoke drifted peacefully from chimneys, and fields stretched outward in neat golden patterns. Nothing remarkable, until the shadow moved. It crossed the city, so slowly that at first he mistook it for a passing cloud. Then wings unfolded, massive, silent. The dragon circled once above the tallest tower. Its scales caught the fading sunlight, shining like old bronze polished by centuries of wind. Long horns swept backward elegantly, while its enormous tail traced graceful arcs through the evening sky. It did not roar. It did not breathe fire. It merely watched. A shepherd nearby looked up only briefly. "Oh," the old man said with a shrug. "Evening patrol." Then he returned to counting sheep, as though dragons performed scheduled inspections every sunset, which, apparently, this one did. Aldrin blinked several times. "I beg your pardon?" "The dragon," said the shepherd patiently, "likes flying before dark. I noticed. Keeps hawks away. I'm not entirely certain that's the most impressive thing about it. The shepherd chuckled. You'll get used to it. One suspected this sentence had confused visitors for generations. Aldrin continued toward the gates as twilight deepened. Nobody appeared frightened. Children chased one another through dusty roads. Farmers loaded wagons. Dogs barked lazily. Life continued beneath a creature capable of crushing towers. There was something deeply unsettling about ordinary happiness, especially when guarded by extraordinary danger. The city gates stood open. No frantic soldiers, no archers nervously scanning the skies, just smiling guards chatting beside polished spears. One nodded as Aldrin approached. First visit? Is it that obvious? You've been staring upward for nearly half a mile. I imagine many newcomers do. They usually walk into fences. Aldrin glanced behind himself. Indeed, there was a fence. Thankfully, he had missed it. Barely. You're fortunate, the guard continued. Last week a merchant walked into his own donkey. The donkey won. Oh, decisively. Inside the walls, the streets glowed warmly beneath lanterns. Stone houses stood shoulder to shoulder, decorated with flower boxes overflowing despite the season. Bakers pulled fragrant loaves from ovens, while blacksmiths hammered, glowing iron rhythmically into shape. Everything felt safe, not because enormous walls surrounded the city, because nobody expected them to matter. The dragon would handle anything dangerous. It was an astonishing amount of confidence to place in something with claws longer than a man's arm. As darkness settled completely, bells rang softly across the rooftops. People paused, looked upward, smiled. Far above, the dragon completed another slow circle, then disappeared toward the towering mountains beyond the valley. No applause followed. No celebration, just quiet satisfaction, as though seeing the moon rise, entirely expected, entirely comforting. Aldrin found an elderly woman sweeping her doorstep. If I may ask, you may. Why does the dragon protect your city? She leaned thoughtfully on her broom. Oh, nobody truly knows. My grandfather claimed it began before his grandfather was born. Some say an ancient king earned its friendship. Others insist the dragon simply liked the view. She smiled. I rather hope it's the second reason. It would certainly be simpler. History rarely chooses simple. Those words lingered with Aldrin. History rarely chose simple. As night deepened, stars appeared one by one across the velvet sky. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the dragon watched unseen, watching, waiting, guarding, not for riches, not for power, but because of a promise nearly everyone had forgotten. Everyone, except perhaps the dragon itself. And Aldrin, though he did not yet realize it, had just taken the first quiet step toward uncovering the oldest secret the city had ever kept. Morning arrived gently over High Hearth, the sort of dawn that seemed almost too polite to disturb anyone. Thin ribbons of mist drifted across the rooftops. The scent of fresh bread floated through the streets, and merchants unfolded their stalls with the practiced rhythm of people who had repeated the same motions for decades. Aldrin had slept surprisingly well. That alone felt unusual. Most unfamiliar cities carried their own chorus of midnight noises, arguments outside taverns, barking dogs determined to settle ancient disagreements, or the occasional wagon wheel, choosing the worst possible moment to break. High Hearth had been remarkably quiet, not silent, comfortably alive. As he stepped into the street, he noticed something curious. No one looked toward the mountains. No anxious glances, no whispered worries. The people trusted their guardian so completely that they had stopped thinking about it. Trust, Aldrin reflected, was a peculiar thing. Given enough years, even miracles became routine. He wandered toward the marketplace, where traders were arranging vegetables into impossibly neat rows, as though carrots became more valuable when they stood at attention. One fishmonger proudly displayed a trout nearly as long as a child. "It's fresh," he announced. A customer narrowed her eyes. It blinked. Exactly. It blinked at me. Excellent eyesight, then. Aldrin smiled despite himself. The market bustled with cheerful conversation, but one detail caught his attention. Every shop displayed a small bronze dragon. Some were carved from wood, others woven from straw. Several had been shaped from clay by hands that clearly possessed enthusiasm far greater than artistic talent. One dragon looked less like a mighty guardian and more like an irritated cabbage. Children laughed as they ran past them, tapping each tiny dragon for luck. An old baker noticed Aldrin examining one. "First visit? Am I truly that easy to identify?" You stopped to stare. I seem to do that often. Most visitors do. The baker dusted flour from his hands. "My grandmother made that carving." He pointed proudly toward the tiny bronze dragon hanging beside the oven. "We replace them every generation." "Why?" "So the dragon knows we still remember." "You've spoken with it?" The baker laughed warmly. "Oh, goodness, no. No one has. Not in my lifetime." Aldrin frowned. "You mean your city's protector never speaks?" "Not to us." "Does it speak to anyone?" The baker shrugged. "If it does, they're keeping wonderfully quiet about it." That answer only deepened the mystery. A dragon that guarded a city that honored the dragon. Yet neither seemed to communicate with the other. It was like watching two old friends continue an ancient conversation entirely through habit. After breakfast, Aldrin climbed the narrow streets toward the city's oldest district. Here, the buildings leaned slightly with age, their stones softened by centuries of rain and wind. Ivy climbed weathered walls. Ancient wells rested beneath worn arches. Time lingered here. He eventually reached a modest hall where the city's records were kept. The keeper of the archives greeted him with suspicious eyes, sharpened by decades of protecting fragile parchment from careless hands. She was an elderly woman named Sister Elswith. Her back was slightly bent. Her memory, however, appeared perfectly straight. "You seek records," she said before Aldrin had introduced himself. "I do." "You carry ink stains." "I hadn't noticed." "I did." She folded her arms. "Only scribes fail to clean their fingers properly." Aldrin looked down. She was absolutely right. There were dark stains along the edge of his thumb. "You've embarrassed many scholars before, haven't you?" "Only the untidy ones." She allowed herself the smallest smile. The archive smelled of wax, old leather, and parchment that had patiently survived generations of curious readers. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Bundles of rolled documents rested inside wooden cases. Dust floated lazily through shafts of sunlight. Aldrin felt immediately at home. Few places offered greater comfort than rooms where history refused to disappear. "I've come to learn about the dragon." Sister Elswith sighed. "So they always do." "Have many scholars visited?" "Enough." "And?" They all left with more questions than answers. She disappeared between towering shelves before returning with several enormous books. Their bindings were cracked with age, their pages yellowed like autumn leaves. The oldest surviving records mention the dragon, almost casually. She opened one volume carefully. It was already here. Already? No story of its arrival. No account of battle. No tale of conquest. As though everyone simply woke one morning and accepted that a dragon lived in the mountains. Aldrin studied the faded handwriting. She spoke the truth. The earliest entries described harvests, marriages, taxes, and occasionally. "The dragon flew east today," or "The dragon frightened wolves from the northern farms." Never explanations, only observations, as though writing, "The sun rose." A curious note near the page's edge caught his eye. The ink had nearly faded away. He leaned closer. "There is a promise that shall not be broken." Nothing more. No names, no date, no explanation. Just a single sentence squeezed into the margin by an unknown hand. A promise. Aldrin remembered the old woman sweeping her doorstep the previous evening. History rarely chooses simple. He carefully copied the sentence into his notebook. Sister Elswith watched silently. "You noticed it. You've seen it before?" "Many times." "What does it mean?" "I've spent 40 years trying to answer that." "And?" She closed the heavy book with gentle care. "I suspect the dragon remembers. But we do not." Outside, the cathedral bells echoed softly across the city. Almost immediately, shadows drifted over the windows. Aldrin stepped outside. There it was again. The dragon. It glided high above High Hearth with effortless grace. Not hunting, not threatening, watching. Its wings scarcely seemed to move. Children pointed happily. A pair of masons barely looked up before returning to their work. A young girl waved enthusiastically. To Aldrin's astonishment, the dragon tilted one great wing, just slightly, a gesture so small that most people never noticed. The little girl laughed anyway. "He waved back," she shouted. Her father chuckled. "He usually does." Usually. The word echoed in Aldrin's thoughts. Not imagination. Not legend. Habit. The dragon knew the people below. Perhaps even recognized them. That tiny acknowledgement carried more meaning than any roar could have. As the dragon disappeared toward the western cliffs, Aldrin opened his notebook once more. He underlined the mysterious sentence. There is a promise that shall not be broken. Somewhere beneath centuries of forgotten history, that promise still bound an entire city and the magnificent creature that guarded it without asking for anything in return. Aldrin had come searching for an interesting tale. Instead, he was beginning to suspect he had stumbled into the oldest secret in the kingdom. The following morning carried the soft scent of rain long before the first clouds gathered. High Hearth seemed unchanged. Bakers still greeted one another across the square. Children still hurried through narrow streets with the endless energy granted only to the very young. Shopkeepers still argued cheerfully over whose cheese deserved the greater praise, a debate that, judging by everyone's confidence, had apparently lasted several generations. Aldrin walked with his notebook tucked beneath one arm. The single sentence copied from the archive occupied his thoughts. There is a promise that shall not be broken. Simple words, heavy words, the sort that survived centuries because someone had feared they might otherwise be forgotten. He returned to Sister Elswith shortly after sunrise. She was already awake, dusting shelves with the careful patience of someone who considered dust an old rival rather than an inconvenience. "You've come back." "I have. I suspected you would." "You knew." She smiled faintly. People who truly love old stories never leave after finding only half of one. Aldrin could hardly argue. "I believe the answer isn't in the books." "No," she nodded. "It rarely is." Without another word, she reached beneath her desk and produced an iron key longer than Aldrin's forearm. Its teeth were oddly shaped, as though crafted for a lock no ordinary door possessed. "I've never shown this to a traveler." "Why now?" "Because you asked questions instead of demanding answers." She motioned for him to follow. The archive extended deeper beneath the hill than Aldrin had imagined. A narrow staircase descended into cool darkness. Each step had been worn smooth by centuries of careful feet. The air grew colder, damper. Somewhere below, water dripped steadily against ancient stone. The sound echoed softly through the passage, like the slow ticking of an invisible clock. At the bottom waited a small chamber supported by thick pillars. Unlike the rooms above, this place contained no shelves, no books, only stone, very old stone. Sister Elswith lifted a lantern. Its golden light revealed carvings covering nearly every wall: dragons, kings, trees, mountains, stars. Entire stories stretched across the rock in winding patterns that seemed almost alive beneath the flickering flame. Aldrin stepped closer. The carvings were astonishingly detailed, not the polished work of palace artists, but something older, simpler, honest. He brushed a finger gently across one weathered line. The grooves were deep. Centuries had softened them, but never erased them. "These predate the city walls," Elswith said quietly. "By how long? No one knows. Have they been translated?" "Only pieces." Aldrin leaned toward one panel. It showed a dragon resting upon a mountainside. Before it stood a single man, not armed, not kneeling, simply standing. Between them rested an object impossible to identify, neither treasure nor weapon. Just a small circle carefully carved into the stone. "What is that?" No one agrees. Some say it's a crown. Others believe it's the sun. Aldrin frowned. "It seems too small." "So I always thought." They continued deeper. Each wall revealed another fragment. A village beside a river. Fields flourishing beneath enormous wings. People gathering around a great fire. Always the dragon nearby. Never attacking, never threatening, watching, guarding. One carving had suffered heavy damage. Time had split the stone straight through the middle. Only half remained. A dragon's claw, a human hand, their fingertips nearly touching. The missing section had vanished centuries ago. "That's unfortunate." "It is," Elswith agreed. "I've spent 20 years wondering what occupied the missing half." Aldrin stared thoughtfully. "Perhaps nothing." "What do you mean?" "If those hands were never meant to touch." She looked at him with renewed interest. "I hadn't considered that." They reached the oldest wall. Unlike the others, its carvings contained writing, not the common language spoken throughout the kingdom, something far older. Its letters curved like winding rivers. Aldrin recognized only a handful of symbols from forgotten manuscripts. One repeated again and again, a spiral enclosed within a circle. He pointed. "I've seen that before." "Where?" "In monastery records." It meant... He searched his memory. An oath. Elswith's eyes widened slightly. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be after 20 years buried beneath books," which, admittedly, was both an impressive qualification and a slightly alarming life choice. She chuckled. "I've always liked scholars." "Because we solve mysteries?" "No. Because you become excited over scratches in old rocks." She wasn't entirely wrong. Aldrin examined the writing more carefully. Some symbols remained surprisingly clear despite their age. Slowly, very slowly, individual words emerged from memory. Mountain, fire, witness, promise. Together they formed only fragments, yet one line seemed almost complete. He whispered the translation aloud. "So long as the promise is remembered." The remaining symbols had worn away. Nothing followed. Just empty stone. "So long as the promise is remembered," Elswith repeated softly. "Remembered by whom?" Neither answered. At the center of the chamber stood a weathered stone pillar. Unlike everything surrounding it, its surface remained almost perfectly smooth. No carvings, no decoration, only one shallow depression shaped like a human hand. Aldrin placed his own hand above it without touching. "Curious. No one knows its purpose. Has anyone tried?" "Many. And Nothing happened. He laughed quietly. I suppose that's reassuring. I'd rather mysterious stones remain peacefully mysterious. An excellent policy, Aldrin thought. History contained far too many stories that began with someone saying, "I wonder what this does." Very few ended comfortably. As they prepared to leave, something caught the lantern light, near the floor, almost hidden beneath centuries of dust. Another carving, tiny compared with the others. It depicted not a dragon, but two, one large, one small. The smaller dragon faced away toward distant mountains. The larger remained beside the city. There was no accompanying text, only the image. Aldrin stared at it. I thought there was only one. So did everyone else. Neither spoke for several moments. Above them, faintly, the cathedral bells announced the passing hour. Life continued in the streets overhead. Merchants bargained, children laughed, bread baked, completely unaware that beneath their feet slept forgotten memories carved by hands that had turned to dust hundreds of years before. As they climbed back toward daylight, Aldrin glanced once more into the darkness below. The ancient chamber seemed reluctant to surrender its secrets all at once. Perhaps that was fitting. Old promises rarely revealed themselves quickly. They preferred patience. Outside, sunlight spilled across the city. Far above, a familiar shadow crossed the rooftops. The dragon, keeping its silent watch, unchanged, faithful. As though it still remembered every word of a promise that the people had long since forgotten. And somewhere beneath those ancient stones, the first true whispers of that forgotten covenant had finally begun to speak again. The discovery beneath the archive lingered in Aldrin's thoughts, like the echo of a bell long after its ringing had ceased. Two dragons, an oath, a promise that had survived even when the words themselves had nearly vanished. He spent the next several days comparing every record he could find with the symbols he had copied into his notebook. Most entries proved wonderfully ordinary. Lists of grain, property disputes over wandering goats, one lengthy complaint regarding a rooster that insisted on announcing dawn nearly an hour too early. Aldrin smiled at that one. Some problems, it seemed, were timeless. Yet hidden among the dullness were faint threads leading farther into the past. Every century or so, a document mentioned someone known only as the Crown's witness. Never a name, never an explanation, only the title. At first, Aldrin assumed it referred to a royal official. Then he noticed something peculiar. The title appeared only during years of great hardship. Floods, harsh winters, plague among livestock, threats of invasion, and always, shortly afterward, another quiet note appeared. The mountain remains faithful. Not the king, not the army, the mountain. He closed the manuscript slowly. "The dragon," he whispered. Someone had written about it without ever naming it. Sister Elswith looked up from another table. "You found something." "I found a habit." The best discoveries usually begin that way. Its roof sagged ever so slightly. Wildflowers had claimed much of the path leading to its entrance. Inside, the air smelled of beeswax and cedar. Sunlight spilled through narrow windows, illuminating faded murals that had almost disappeared beneath the passing centuries. At the far end stood an elderly monk arranging candles. His beard flowed nearly to his waist, though his eyebrows seemed determined to compete. Brother Corvin. If age granted wisdom by the inch, Aldrin thought, this man must possess enough to advise kings. Corvin greeted Elswith with an easy smile. "You've brought another question." "I've brought many. Those are my favorite kind." His voice was calm, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had long ago stopped worrying about being interrupted. Elswith introduced Aldrin. "The scholar believes the dragon's promise began with a king." Brother Corvin regarded him thoughtfully. "Then perhaps the scholar is ready for a story." They settled onto worn wooden benches. For several moments, Corvin remained silent, not searching for words, remembering them. "My grandfather told this tale to me," he began softly. His grandmother heard it from hers. Whether every detail is true, only the mountain knows. Aldrin leaned forward. Corvin smiled. Long before High Hearth became a city, this valley held only scattered farms. The people were poor. The winters were cruel. The mountain belonged to the dragon. Did they fear it? Aldrin asked. They respected it. There is a difference, he continued. One winter, unlike any before descended upon the valley. Snow buried the fields. Animals perished. The rivers froze so solid that wagons crossed them without breaking the ice. Hunger followed. Then sickness. The villages prepared for their final season. Their ruler at that time was not yet called king, only Lord Edric, a young man with more determination than wealth, more responsibility than soldiers. He could have abandoned the valley. Many advised him to do exactly that. Instead, he climbed the mountain, alone. Aldrin frowned. He sought the dragon? Corvin nodded. So the story says. No sword? None. No army? Only courage. And perhaps just enough foolishness. The monk chuckled softly. History often struggles to tell those apart. The climb lasted 2 days. Snow reached Edric's knees. Cold winds tore at his cloak. Several times he nearly turned back, not because he feared the dragon, because he feared returning to his people with nothing. At sunset on the second day, he reached a great stone ledge overlooking the valley. There the dragon waited, already awake, already watching. It was enormous, older than memory. Its bronze scales reflected the last light of the day, like burnished armor. Smoke drifted lazily from its nostrils, not as a threat, simply because the mountain air was cold. Edric stopped several paces away. Neither spoke. The silence stretched. Finally, the dragon lowered its great head, not in submission, in curiosity. Corvin's voice softened further. The old stories say the dragon could speak every language ever uttered beneath the sky, but it rarely chose to. What happened? The dragon asked only one question. What do you seek? Edric answered without hesitation. Tomorrow. The monk allowed the word to linger. Aldrin felt an unexpected chill, not from the story, from its simplicity. No request for riches, no plea for victory, just tomorrow. Another day for his people, another sunrise. The dragon considered him for a long time, Corvin continued. It finally asked what he would give in return. Aldrin waited. Edric looked back toward the frozen valley. My word, Brother Corvin folded his hands. The dragon laughed. Aldrin blinked. It laughed? A sound like distant thunder. It said that kings break promises more easily than dry twigs. Edric replied. The monk smiled faintly. That he was not asking the dragon to trust kings. Only one man. Silence settled over the chapel. Even the candles seemed to burn more quietly. What did the dragon do? Aldrin whispered. It accepted. Outside, clouds drifted slowly across the afternoon sky. The city bustled as always. Children chased hoops through narrow streets. A Cooper-shaped barrel staves with rhythmic taps. Life continued, unaware that one quiet conversation from centuries ago had changed everything. The dragon descended into the valley, Corvin said. It drove away wolves. It uncovered springs hidden beneath the ice. It guarded the villages until winter passed. And Edric kept his promise? So the legends claim. How? Corvin looked toward the mountains visible through the chapel window. That, he said, is the part everyone argues about. Some claimed Edric returned every year to renew his oath. Others believed he surrendered something more valuable than gold. A few insisted he gave the dragon a secret known only to rulers. No record agreed. Only one fact remained constant. Neither king nor dragon ever betrayed the other. For generations afterward, the valley prospered. Villages became a town. The town became High Hearth. The dragon remained, watching, guarding, faithful. Because somewhere between a desperate man and an ancient creature, a promise had been spoken that neither time nor death had managed to erase. Aldrin closed his notebook carefully. The story answered one question. It raised 10 more. Most importantly, what exactly had Edric promised? And why did that promise still bind the dragon, centuries after the king himself had turned to dust? The mountain, silent beneath drifting clouds, kept its answer. For now. For the first time since arriving in High Hearth, Aldrin found himself looking toward the mountains, not with curiosity alone, but with unease. Brother Corvin's story had explained why the dragon might have chosen to protect the valley. It explained nothing about the present. Promises, after all, were peculiar things. Most faded after a few years. Some lasted a lifetime. Very few survived the deaths of everyone who had ever spoken them. Yet this one endured. It stretched across centuries like an invisible bridge between an ancient king and a creature that still circled peacefully above the city each morning. Aldrin closed his notebook. If Lord Edric truly gave only his word, he murmured, then either it was the greatest promise ever made, or it wasn't the only thing he offered. Brother Corvin gave the slightest nod. That question has troubled wiser minds than mine. Children played games that involved chasing one another with wooden swords while loudly declaring themselves unbeatable generals. A claim usually abandoned the moment someone's mother called them home for supper. The dragon continued its quiet patrols. Every sunrise, every sunset. Always the same graceful circles over the valley before disappearing beyond the western peaks. Nothing changed. Until the 7th morning. A shepherd arrived at the north gate before dawn. His cloak was torn. His boots were caked with mountain mud. The guards recognized him immediately. What happened? The shepherd caught his breath. There are fires. Where? The eastern passes. That single sentence spread through High Hearth faster than smoke carried by a strong wind. Not panic, concern. People gathered in small groups throughout the marketplace. Voices remained calm, but quieter than before. Aldrin listened carefully. The beacon towers? Not ours. Across the mountains. I heard 3 fires. My cousin says there were 5. Rumors, he reminded himself, multiplied faster than rabbits and were often just as difficult to catch. Still, by midday, the city council had summoned every messenger they could find. That alone suggested the shepherd had not imagined what he had seen. Aldrin climbed the western wall shortly before sunset. From there, the mountains stretched endlessly across the horizon. Their distant peaks glowed crimson beneath the lowering sun. For a long while, he saw nothing unusual. Then, tiny points of orange. Far away, almost too distant to notice. One, then another, then a third. Signal fires, not campfires. Too evenly spaced, too deliberate. A guard standing nearby folded his arms. They're closer than last month. Aldrin turned sharply. You've seen them before? For weeks. We hoped they'd disappear. They haven't. What do they mean? The guard watched the distant flames. No one's certain. But my grandfather always said signal fires in those mountains meant armies. Brother Corvin. Even several elderly women who appeared entirely unimpressed by the importance of anyone else present. One of them carried knitting. Aldrin privately decided she was probably the most formidable person in the room. The council's eldest member rose. Our scouts have returned. The room fell silent. They report movement beyond the eastern ridge. How many? No precise count, but enough. The captain spoke next. Disciplined camps, supply wagons, horses, engineers, not raiders, not wandering mercenaries, an organized army. The murmurs began immediately. Whose banner? No banner. That's impossible. So my scouts believed. The captain's expression remained grim. They carried plain gray standards. No crest, no colors, nothing. Brother Corvin frowned. I dislike armies that hide their names. So do I, the captain replied. After the meeting dispersed, Aldrin remained behind with Elswith and Corvin. They're coming here, Aldrin said. Most likely. Why? Elswith sighed. High Hearth has always occupied an important crossroads. Corvin shook his head. No. They both looked toward him. Not merely the crossroads. The dragon. Silence settled over the room. You believe someone wants it? Corvin nodded slowly. Imagine hearing tales of a city guarded by an immortal creature. Some would seek friendship. Others would seek power. Aldrin felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. History offered countless examples of rulers trying to possess things they barely understood. Sacred relics, ancient weapons, forgotten magic. None had ended particularly well. Trying to command a dragon seemed an especially ambitious mistake. The following morning brought another surprise. The dragon appeared. It circled High Hearth once, twice, 3 times. People gathered in the streets. Children waved. Merchants paused. Everyone expected the familiar pattern. Instead, the dragon climbed higher, far higher than usual. It hovered above the city, wings scarcely moving, watching the eastern horizon, watching the distant mountains, watching the signal fires. For nearly an hour it remained there, completely still. Aldrin stood beside dozens of silent townsfolk. No one spoke. No one needed to. Even those who knew nothing of armies understood one thing. Their guardian had noticed something. Finally, the dragon turned. It flew east, straight toward the distant peaks. Hope stirred among the crowd. It's going to stop them. Of course it is. It always protects us. The bronze shape dwindled against the morning sky until it vanished among the mountains. The marketplace slowly returned to life. Confidence spread almost immediately. If the dragon knows, then we're safe. Aldrin wished he shared that certainty. The dragon returned shortly before dusk, alone. It crossed above the city more slowly than usual. Its wings beat heavily, not injured, not exhausted, simply thoughtful. It landed upon the highest western cliff overlooking High Hearth. There it remained, watching. Hours passed. It did not leave. It did not roar. It did not breathe fire. It simply stared toward the east, where faint smoke still marked the horizon. Brother Corvin joined Aldrin atop the city wall. I've never seen it do that. Do what? Wait. They stood together in silence. Below them, the city lit its evening lanterns one by one. Above them, the dragon remained motionless against the darkening sky. Finally, Aldrin spoke. If an army truly comes, the dragon will fight. Corvin did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched the Guardian as stars slowly emerged overhead. I'm no longer certain. Those words unsettled Aldrin more than any rumor from the mountains. Because if even the wisest man in High Hearth doubted the dragon's next move, then perhaps the ancient promise carried rules. No one alive remembered, and somewhere beyond the eastern peaks, beneath nameless gray banners, an old enemy was drawing steadily closer, one that seemed to know exactly where to find the city protected by a dragon. The next morning dawned beneath a blanket of low gray clouds. They rolled over the mountains without haste, swallowing the highest peaks until only their dark outlines remained. The air carried the scent of wet stone, and a cool breeze wandered through high hearth, stirring banners atop the walls. The city awoke as it always had. Bakers kneaded dough, smiths lit their forges. Farmers guided wagons through the gates. If someone had arrived that morning, knowing nothing of signal fires or distant armies, they might have believed nothing at all had changed. Yet the conversations were quieter. People smiled. They simply smiled with one eye turned toward the eastern horizon. Aldrin spent the morning upon the northern wall, beside Captain Rowan, commander of the city's guards. Rowan was broad-shouldered, with a beard beginning to surrender to gray, and hands marked by enough scars to suggest that swords had disagreed with him on numerous occasions. "You've never fought beside a dragon, have you?" Aldrin asked. Rowan chuckled. "I've never fought beside anyone with wings." "Has the dragon defended the city before?" "Not in my lifetime. Or my father's. Or his father's." Aldrin looked surprised. "Then how do people know it will?" Rowan rested his elbows on the stone parapet. "They don't. They believe." There was a difference. Belief required no proof, only faith. Near midday, a horn echoed from the eastern watchtower. Not the long blast of immediate danger. 3 short calls, scouts returning. The gates opened. 5 riders entered the city, their horses lathered with sweat, despite the cool weather. One scout nearly slid from his saddle before 2 guards caught him. Captain Rowan met them immediately. "What did you see?" The youngest rider swallowed hard. "The army crossed Black Pass." "How many?" "We stopped counting." "Thousands?" A weary nod. "They're building roads as they advance." "Roads? So their supply wagons won't slow." That single detail silenced everyone nearby. An army preparing roads did not intend a quick raid. It intended to stay. The council gathered once again. Maps covered the great table. Pebbles marked villages. Wooden figures represented companies of soldiers. Someone had even carved a tiny dragon from oak. Its craftsmanship left much to be desired. "It looks rather cheerful," Aldrin whispered. Brother Corvin glanced at the carving. "It does. Perhaps that's encouraging. I suspect it simply has a generous sculptor." Captain Rowan pointed toward the eastern passes. "They'll reach the valley within 8 days. Perhaps less." "What banners now?" asked a merchant. "None." "No heralds?" "No." "No demands." The room grew heavier. Brother Corvin finally spoke. "An army that announces nothing often believes explanations unnecessary." Then it flew directly toward the eastern ridge. The entire city watched. This time, the dragon did not disappear among the clouds. Instead, it descended onto a towering cliff overlooking the valley road. Even from miles away, its bronze scales caught the fading light. There it remained, perfectly still, watching, waiting. Captain Rowan smiled faintly. "It chooses the battlefield." Several guards nodded confidently. Aldrin wanted to believe them. The following day, the first refugees arrived, not from High Hearth, from tiny farming villages beyond Black Pass. Families, shepherds, millers, children clutching blankets. They brought no tales of battle, only stories of gray tents stretching farther than they could see. One elderly farmer sat upon an overturned barrel, while volunteers handed him warm stew. "They asked no questions," he said quietly. "They simply measured the roads." "Measured?" Aldrin repeated. "With ropes," the old man nodded, "as though counting every step." Another refugee added softly, "They looked toward the mountain more than toward us." That sentence lingered in Aldrin's thoughts. Toward the mountain, not the city. 3 mornings later, the enemy finally appeared. Not close enough for battle, close enough to see. Thousands of tiny figures wound slowly through the eastern valley like a dark ribbon. Even at that distance, their discipline was unmistakable. No shouting, no disorder, just endless rows advancing with relentless patience. Captain Rowan watched from the wall. They'll camp tonight. And tomorrow, they'll reach the lower plain. Children were quietly led indoors. Market stalls remained open, mostly. No one wished to admit fear. As sunset approached, every eye turned toward the western cliffs. The dragon still rested there, motionless. Surely now, Aldrin thought, surely now it would fly. The enemy had entered the valley. This was the moment every legend had promised. A trumpet sounded from the distant army. Another answered. Their lines continued forward. The dragon did not move. Captain Rowan frowned. It waits. For what? Aldrin asked. No answer came. The army halted to establish camp. Smoke rose from hundreds of cooking fires. The dragon remained exactly where it had been since morning. Not a single wing beat. Not a single roar. Night settled over the valley. Lanterns flickered along High Hearth's walls. Across the plain, countless enemy campfires glowed like a second sky fallen upon the earth. Brother Corvin joined Aldrin atop the battlements. It's waiting far too long. Perhaps dawn. Perhaps. Yet his voice lacked conviction. Below them, townsfolk whispered among themselves. It will attack tonight. They won't even see it coming. My grandfather said dragons prefer darkness. My uncle claimed they preferred daylight. My aunt claimed they preferred sheep. Your aunt owned sheep. She considered herself an expert. Even in uncertain times, gentle humor found its way into conversation. It helped. A little. Dawn came. The enemy broke camp. Columns advanced once more. Closer. Still the dragon watched from its lonely cliff. Captain Rowan finally gave the order. Prepare the walls. Archers took position. Cauldrons were filled. Stone piles were stacked. The city had always maintained its defenses. No one had expected to use them. Aldrin climbed the highest tower for a clearer view. The dragon filled the western skyline. The army approached from the east. Between them lay the valley, a perfect place for a dragon to strike. Instead, nothing. Hours passed. The enemy advanced another mile. Nothing. The dragon lowered its head slightly, almost as though listening to a voice no one else could hear. Then it settled even deeper against the stone. It had chosen not to fight. Not yet. A murmur spread across High Hearth. Confusion replaced certainty. Captain Rowan stared in disbelief. The dragon. He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Aldrin understood why. For generations, the people had believed that the dragon's arrival meant safety. Now, for the first time in living memory, danger stood at their doorstep, and their immortal guardian refused to lift a single claw. Somewhere within the forgotten promise lay the reason. But until someone uncovered it, the city would have to face an approaching army with nothing more than stone walls, ordinary courage, and questions that had waited centuries to be answered. The silence that settled over High Hearth felt heavier than the approaching army. Not because the enemy had reached the valley. Not because thousands of soldiers now camped within sight of the city walls. It was the dragon. Or rather, what the dragon had not done. For generations, stories had ended with the same reassuring conclusion. Whenever danger appeared, the great bronze guardian descended from the mountains, and the danger quietly disappeared again. No one alive had ever needed to know how. Now they did. And the answer refused to arrive. Morning mist clung to the fields between the city and the enemy camp. From the battlements, Aldrin could make out neat rows of gray tents stretching across the plain. Smoke curled upward from hundreds of cook fires, rising so evenly that the entire encampment looked less like an army and more like a carefully planned village. They're patient, Captain Rowan observed. "They're waiting." "For reinforcements?" Rowan slowly shook his head. "No, they're waiting for us." Aldrin looked again toward the western cliffs. The dragon remained exactly where it had been for days, watching, silent, still. Something unexpected happened before noon. A single rider emerged from the gray camp. No escort, no banner. Just one horse moving at an unhurried pace toward the city. The guards tensed. Archers raised their bows. The rider stopped well beyond bowshot and planted a plain wooden staff into the earth. Hanging from it was a strip of white cloth. "A messenger," Rowan muttered. The city gates remained closed. Instead, Captain Rowan and Brother Corvin rode out together beneath a flag of truce. Aldrin watched anxiously from the wall. The meeting lasted only a few minutes. No raised voices, no dramatic gestures, simply conversation. Then Rowan returned carrying a sealed scroll. His expression was darker than before. The council assembled immediately. The scroll lay unopened upon the table. Its seal bore no royal crest, only a single symbol pressed into dark wax, a spiral enclosed within a circle. Aldrin's breath caught. The oath. Every eye turned toward him. "You've seen it?" He nodded. It was carved beneath the archive. "In the oldest chamber." Brother Corvin frowned. "The same symbol?" "The very same." Captain Rowan carefully broke the seal. Inside rested only a few lines. He read them aloud. "The promise has been broken. The Guardian no longer holds authority. Open your gates before the third sunrise. This valley returns to its rightful keepers. No signature, no king's name, nothing, only the symbol." The room remained utterly still. Finally, one merchant spoke the question. Everyone else had been thinking. "What promise?" No one answered. Aldrin spread his notes across the table, the copied inscriptions, sketches of the underground carvings, fragments translated from ancient stone. Brother Corvin studied them carefully. Sister Elswith adjusted her spectacles. Captain Rowan folded his arms. Aldrin pointed toward one incomplete translation. "So long as the promise is remembered." He traced another note. "There is a promise that shall not be broken." Then the messenger's scroll. "The promise has been broken." They know. They know exactly what the promise is. Brother Corvin nodded slowly. "And they believe it has ended." "Or they wish us to believe it," Captain Rowan added. Both possibilities were equally dangerous. That afternoon, Aldrin returned alone to the ancient chamber beneath the archive. This time, he carried 2 lanterns. The deeper light reached places he had overlooked before. He examined every carving, every crack, every weathered line. Hours passed. Nothing. He almost convinced himself to leave. Then he noticed something curious. One section of the floor sounded different beneath his boots. Not hollow. Simply less solid. He knelt, brushing away centuries of dust. There, a narrow seam, perfectly straight, too perfect to be natural. He fetched an old iron pry bar resting against the wall and gently eased upward. Stone resisted, then shifted. With a deep grinding sound, a flat slab rose just enough to reveal darkness beneath. A hidden compartment. Aldrin's heartbeat quickened. Inside rested a single object wrapped in cracked leather. No jewels, no golden crown. Just a weathered wooden box, scarcely larger than a loaf of bread. Its hinges had turned green with age. He lifted it carefully. The wood felt surprisingly light, as though it had waited patiently for exactly this moment. Back upstairs, Sister Elswith stared in astonishment. "I've worked here 40 years. And never found that?" "I dusted around it." Aldrin smiled. History can be remarkably good at hiding. Together they opened the box. Inside lay 3 items: a bronze ring, a folded piece of faded cloth, and a small journal. Its leather cover had nearly crumbled away. Several pages were missing. Others clung together from age. Yet, the handwriting remained readable. Barely. The first page bore a single name, Edric. No title, no crown. Simply, Edric. Brother Corvin closed his eyes briefly. I never believed it still existed. The ink had darkened, as though pressed into the parchment with unusual force. Today I made the promise. Every person in the room leaned closer. It was not the bargain I expected. The dragon asked for no treasure, no lands, no servants, only remembrance. Aldrin continued reading aloud. It said kingdoms vanish, castles crumble, even mountains change. Only memory chooses whether promises live or die. The next line had nearly disappeared. He deciphered it slowly. Each ruler after me must remember freely. Never by force, Brother Corvin whispered. Freely. Another page followed. Part of it had been destroyed by water. Enough remained to reveal one crucial sentence. Should remembrance fail? The remaining words had dissolved into illegible stains. Silence filled the archive. Captain Rowan looked toward Aldrin. That's it? I'm afraid so. Elswith gently turned another page. Blank. Another. Blank. Then the journal ended. The final leaves had either rotted away or been deliberately removed. Night settled outside. The dragons still watched from the western cliffs. The enemy camp glowed with hundreds of fires. Between them, High Hearth held its breath. Aldrin stared once more at Edric's journal. The answer had finally emerged. The dragon's duty had never depended upon bloodlines, nor crowns, nor victories. It depended upon remembrance, a promise renewed willingly by each generation, never demanded, never enforced, only chosen, which raised one terrifying possibility. At some point, someone had forgotten. Whether through neglect, ignorance, or the slow erosion of centuries, the chain stretching back to Edric had broken. If the ancient covenant required remembrance, then perhaps the dragon was no longer allowed to defend the city, not because it lacked the strength, because it was still honoring the very promise that had bound it for centuries. The cruelest prison was not made of iron. Sometimes it was made of one's own word. No one in the archive spoke for several long moments. The old journal rested open upon the table, its faded pages illuminated by the gentle glow of oil lamps. Outside, rain had begun to fall, soft enough to whisper against the windows rather than drum upon them. It suited the silence. Captain Rowan finally broke it. So, he looked from the journal to Aldrin. If this promise truly depended upon each generation remembering it, who failed? Aldrin wished he had an answer. History was remarkably skilled at recording wars, taxes, marriages, and arguments over property lines. It was far less reliable when documenting the exact moment someone simply stopped remembering. It may not have been one person, Sister Elswith said quietly. Sometimes traditions disappear slowly. She looked around the archive, a prayer omitted, a ceremony forgotten, a story no longer told. Each generation loses one small piece. And after enough years, Brother Corvin finished her thought. Everyone believes they still possess the whole. Beyond the eastern fields, the enemy remained patient. No attacks, no demands beyond the scroll, just waiting, as though certain time favored them. Perhaps it did. The council gathered once again after sunset. This meeting was smaller. Only Captain Rowan, Brother Corvin, Sister Elswith, Aldrin, and Lady Miriam, the elderly chairwoman who somehow managed to knit through every discussion without ever missing an important detail. Aldrin had begun to suspect the knitting itself improved her concentration, or perhaps intimidated everyone else into speaking sensibly. Lady Miriam set her needles aside. If the promise has been forgotten, can it be remembered again? Aldrin hesitated. The journal doesn't say. Brother Corvin turned another fragile page. No, but it does say something else. He pointed toward a sentence Aldrin had nearly overlooked. The ink was faint. Several words had faded almost beyond recognition. Together, they slowly deciphered it. When memory weakens, seek the valley. The next word had vanished. Then, where the first witness waits. Captain Rowan frowned. The first witness? Someone who saw the promise? Or something, Aldrin replied. The room grew thoughtful. Sister Elswith stood abruptly. I've heard that phrase. Everyone turned toward her. Where? My grandmother. She used to tell stories about a forbidden valley beyond the western mountains. I assumed it was meant to frighten children. What did she call it? Elswith closed her eyes, searching. Then she smiled. The Valley of Echoes. I remember that name. It appears in old pilgrimage songs. I thought it symbolic. Apparently not. Captain Rowan unfolded a weathered map across the table. The western mountains filled nearly half the parchment. Most roads ended well before the highest peaks. One narrow trail continued farther. Then, nothing. Blank space. I was afraid someone would say that. No villages. No rivers. No landmarks. Aldrin traced the unfinished trail. It simply stops. Brother Corvin smiled faintly. Maps often stop where certainty ends. Lady Miriam picked up her knitting once more. Then someone must continue beyond the map. She said it as calmly as if suggesting an extra loaf of bread be baked for supper. Captain Rowan sighed. He understood immediately. Oh, no. I study journeys. I don't generally take them. Brother Corvin smiled. History occasionally disagrees. Captain Rowan folded his arms. You discovered the journal. You read the carvings. If anyone can understand what waits in that valley, it's you. Aldrin opened his mouth, closed it again. He disliked how reasonable everyone sounded. Preparations began before dawn. The expedition would be small. Captain Rowan insisted upon only 3 companions. A larger group attracts attention. Smaller groups move faster. He selected Mira, the city's most experienced ranger. She knew every trail within 50 miles and possessed the remarkable ability to notice footprints most people would happily mistake for oddly shaped rocks. The second companion was Thomas, a young blacksmith, broad as an oak tree, gentle enough to apologize after accidentally frightening chickens. I don't actually know why I'm coming, Thomas admitted while packing supplies. You carry heavy things, Mira answered. Oh, that makes sense. He seemed delighted to have such a clear purpose. As the sun climbed above the eastern hills, the 4 travelers stood before the western gate. Citizens gathered quietly, not cheering, simply watching. The dragon remained upon its familiar cliff. It observed them without moving. Aldrin looked up. For just a moment, the dragon met his eyes. There was intelligence there, ancient, patient, almost hopeful. Then it blinked once, slowly, nothing more. No roar, no signal, only that single deliberate movement. Brother Corvin stepped forward. He handed Aldrin the journal. It belongs on this journey. I'll bring it back. I know. The old monk smiled. That isn't why I gave it to you. Their peaks disappeared into drifting clouds. The ancient trail proved narrower than expected. Wildflowers pushed between weathered stones. Moss covered abandoned milestones whose carved numbers had long ago surrendered to time. By midday, they reached the last shepherd's hut. Beyond that, nothing. Civilization quietly ended. Only wilderness remained. Toward evening, they found an old stone marker beside the path. Unlike the milestones, it carried no distance. Instead, it bore the familiar symbol, the spiral enclosed within a circle. Below it, almost hidden beneath lichen, another carving emerged as Mira carefully brushed the stone clean. Not words, a dragon, standing beside a human figure. Between them, a lantern, not a crown, not the sun, a lantern. Aldrin's eyes widened. Of course. What? Thomas asked. The carving beneath the archive. The object between the king and the dragon. It wasn't a crown at all. It was this. A lantern. Mira looked puzzled. What does that mean? Aldrin studied the image. A lantern doesn't create daylight. It preserves light. When darkness comes. The four exchanged thoughtful glances. Perhaps remembrance itself was never meant to blaze like the sun. Perhaps it only needed someone willing to keep a small flame alive through the longest night. As dusk settled over the mountains, they made camp beneath towering pines. Far behind them, almost invisible against the fading horizon, High Hearth rested beneath the watchful gaze of its silent guardian. Far ahead, beyond valleys left blank on every map, waited the first witness, and if fortune proved kinder than history usually managed to be, the forgotten path to renewing a promise older than the city itself. The mountain air carried a different kind of silence. It was not the quiet of sleeping streets or empty halls. It was older than that. The silence of places where people visited only briefly, leaving behind little more than footprints that the next rain politely erased. Aldrin awoke before sunrise to the crackling of the campfire. Mira was already awake, sharpening a small knife with slow, careful strokes. Thomas was still asleep beneath 3 blankets. Despite insisting the previous evening that one would be more than enough. You were right, he admitted, without opening his eyes. About what? Mira asked. Everything, she smiled. I appreciate efficiency. Sections had collapsed into ravines. Others disappeared beneath thick carpets of moss. Only the occasional weathered stone marker reassured them. They still walked a path once traveled by many feet. Strangely, each marker bore the same carved lantern. Never the dragon, never the king. Always the lantern. Aldrin found that detail increasingly fascinating. Someone wanted travelers to remember the light, he said, not the people carrying it. Brother Corvin's words echoed in his mind. Only memory chooses whether promises live or die. Perhaps the lantern had never represented an object. Perhaps it represented the act of remembering itself. By midday, the forest began to change. The towering pines gave way to enormous silver birches, whose white bark gleamed softly, even beneath thick clouds. Their leaves whispered constantly, though Aldrin could feel almost no wind. It sounds like people talking, Thomas observed. Mira listened. It does. What are they saying? Thomas tilted his head thoughtfully. I sincerely hope they're discussing lunch. Aldrin laughed. I've met scholars with fewer practical priorities. They paused beside a clear stream to eat bread and dried apples. The water was so pure that smooth stones at the bottom appeared almost magnified. Small trout darted lazily through the current. For a little while, the approaching army seemed impossibly far away. As they prepared to continue, Mira suddenly raised one hand. Everyone stopped. What is it? She knelt beside the trail. Fresh footprints, not theirs. Boot prints, only one traveler, heading west, toward the Valley of Echoes. They're recent, she said quietly. Ours. Captain Rowan had once remarked that tracks could tell stories. Mira seemed capable of reading entire novels from a patch of mud. Whoever it is, she continued, walks with a staff. Old? Perhaps. They favor their left leg. Aldrin examined the prints. To him, they looked remarkably like footprints. He wisely left the real observations to Mira. The path climbed steadily until afternoon. Then, quite unexpectedly, it ended. Not at a cliff, not at a river. Simply ended. Ahead stretched an open meadow dotted with wildflowers. No road, no markers. Nothing. Thomas scratched his head. I thought ancient paths weren't supposed to vanish. They usually don't, Aldrin admitted. Mira slowly turned in a full circle. They haven't. She pointed toward the grass. The trail continues. None of the others saw it. She smiled. It isn't made of stone anymore. She began walking through the meadow, following subtle changes in the flowers. Softer ground, bent stems, tiny clues invisible to everyone else. After several minutes, Aldrin finally noticed it. The grass formed an almost imperceptible line winding across the field. Someone, or many someones, long ago, had walked this way often enough to leave a memory upon the land itself. Late in the afternoon, they reached a narrow ridge. Beyond it lay a valley unlike any Aldrin had imagined. It was peaceful. A broad lake reflected the sky so perfectly that clouds seemed to float both above and below. Ancient oaks spread their branches across gentle hills. Wildflowers painted the meadows in soft blues and golds. The air felt strangely warm despite the mountain altitude. This is forbidden, Thomas whispered. It looks welcoming. Mira frowned thoughtfully. That's what worries me. At the valley's center stood a solitary cottage built from weathered stone. Thin smoke drifted from its chimney. Someone lived there, or had very recently. They approached slowly. The garden surrounding the cottage overflowed with herbs and flowering plants arranged in careful circles. Wooden wind chimes hung beneath the eaves, filling the air with soft musical notes whenever the breeze stirred. An old man sat upon a bench, carving a piece of cedar. He did not look surprised to see them. Without lifting his eyes from his work, he spoke. You took longer than I expected. The four travelers exchanged puzzled glances. Aldrin stepped forward. Were you expecting us? No. I was expecting someone. The old man smiled gently. Eventually. His beard reached nearly to his belt. His hair was silver. His eyes seemed far younger than the rest of him. Bright, curious, almost amused. You've come because the dragon refuses to fight. Aldrin's breath caught. How did you know that? The old man finally looked up. Because it always refuses. Silence. Thomas blinked. Always? The old man nodded. At first. Only after everyone had settled did he introduce himself. My name is Garrick. Do you live here alone? Aldrin asked. For the moment. What do you mean? People come. They leave. I remain. It was a wonderfully mysterious answer. Also, a slightly inconvenient one. Aldrin preferred explanations that contained fewer riddles. Garrick seemed to prefer the opposite. Finally, Aldrin placed Edric's journal upon the table. We found this. The old man's expression softened immediately. He rested one weathered hand upon the cover without opening it. I wondered where he left it. You knew Edric? Garrick chuckled. I knew the boy. He became a king afterward. A heavy silence settled over the room. Thomas slowly lowered his teacup. Mira stared. Aldrin struggled to find words. You can't possibly. Garrick finished the sentence for him. Be that old? He smiled kindly. No. Not exactly. Outside, evening sunlight painted the valley in shades of gold. Inside the quiet cottage, Aldrin realized that every answer they had found so far had merely opened the door to an even older mystery. Because the gentle old hermit, sitting across the table, spoke of King Edric not as a legend, but as someone he had once known. And if that impossible claim proved true, then the first witness had been waiting far longer than any of them had dared imagine. For several heartbeats, no one spoke. The cottage seemed untouched by the urgency that filled the world beyond the mountains. The kettle continued to murmur softly over the fire. A log settled in the hearth with a gentle crack. Outside, birds sang as though armies had never been invented. Aldrin studied Garrick carefully. The old man's face bore the lines of age, certainly, but not enough, not nearly enough. If his words were true, he should have belonged to history itself. Instead, he sat calmly pouring another cup of tea. Thomas finally found his voice. "So," he cleared his throat. "How old are you?" Garrick smiled. "I stopped counting." "That's not especially helpful." "No, it rarely is." Even Mira allowed herself a quiet laugh. Aldrin opened Edric's journal to the first page. "You said you knew him." "I did." "Were you his advisor?" "No." "A priest?" "No." "A soldier?" Garrick shook his head again. "I was his friend." The simplicity of the answer somehow made it more believable. Not an advisor, not a famous hero, just a friend. "He climbed this valley alone," Garrick continued. "He was exhausted, half frozen, and entirely convinced the dragon intended to eat him." "Reasonable," Thomas muttered. "Quite." Garrick chuckled. He spent nearly an hour rehearsing speeches. "What happened?" "The dragon arrived, and Edric forgot every single one." Mira smiled. "I suppose that is also reasonable. The stories people tell are rarely false. They're simply," he searched for the right word, "incomplete. Yes, Edric met the dragon. Yes, they made a promise. But they did not meet first." Aldrin frowned. "They didn't?" "No. They met because of me." Silence returned. "You introduced them?" "In a manner of speaking." Garrick reached beneath a shelf and removed a smooth wooden box. Inside rested several polished stones. Each one shimmered faintly with veins of bronze running through gray granite. "They're beautiful," Mira said. "They're eggs." Thomas nearly dropped his cup. "Eggs," Garrick nodded. "Long empty." "The shells remained." Aldrin stared. "Dragon eggs?" "Yes. Very old ones." "There were two." He gently touched one shell. "The elder hatched first. The younger," his smile faded slightly, "never truly learned to fly. Simply as truth. Dragons are not born often. They cherish every hatchling. When one is lost," he looked toward the mountains, "the memory never fades." Aldrin suddenly understood why the dragon above High Hearth had always seemed so patient, so careful. Creatures who measured life in centuries likely measured grief differently as well. Garrick returned to the table. "I was the valley's keeper." "What does that mean?" Aldrin asked. "I cared for the nesting grounds. I watched over the young. I learned their language." "You spoke with dragons?" "They're excellent listeners, and surprisingly opinionated." Thomas smiled. "I somehow expected that." "The elder dragon especially disliked goats." "Goats?" Mira repeated. "They ate flowers. The dragon adored flowers." There was considerable disagreement. For the first time in days, the tension in the room eased. Even ancient legends, it seemed, occasionally argued about gardening. Aldrin leaned forward. "Then tell us, why won't the dragon defend High Hearth?" Garrick's smile slowly disappeared. "Because it cannot. It can. We've all seen it fly. It still possesses strength. Strength isn't the problem." He folded his hands. "The promise was." When Edric asked for the dragon's protection, the dragon refused at first. Why? Because dragons do not rule humans. They guard. They advise. But they never become kings. So they made rules. Garrick nodded. The dragon would defend the valley only while the people remembered they were responsible for one another, not dependent upon the dragon. The guardian existed to protect, never to replace courage. Aldrin's thoughts raced. The remembrance wasn't about honoring the dragon. No, it was about honoring the promise itself. Exactly. I missed that. So did everyone else. The paper remained astonishingly well preserved. Its writing differed from Edric's, larger, stronger, almost elegant. The dragon wrote this? Mira whispered. Garrick nodded. In your language. It practiced. The note contained only a few lines. Fire may frighten away wolves. Fire cannot plant fields. Wings may shield a city. Wings cannot teach hearts courage. When the people wait for the dragon to do what they must first do themselves. The final sentence had faded. Only the last 3 words remained. The promise sleeps. No one moved. Outside, the wind stirred the branches of the great oaks. Aldrin slowly looked up. The city forgot. Not the dragon. The purpose. Garrick nodded sadly. Generation after generation. They thanked the dragon. They honored the dragon. They trusted the dragon. And little by little, they stopped believing they had responsibilities of their own. They believed safety belonged to someone else. The old man's voice remained gentle. There is kindness in protection, but there is danger in becoming unable to stand without it. Not hopeless, understanding. The dragon had not abandoned High Hearth. It was keeping its word, even when doing so made it appear heartless, even when the people it loved believed it had failed them. Garrick stood and walked to the doorway. Far beyond the valley, barely visible against the evening sky, the western peaks formed a dark line on the horizon. The army believes the promise is broken. He spoke almost to himself. They're wrong. It sleeps. Sleeping things, he smiled gently, can be awakened. Aldrin closed the journal with renewed determination. The journey had finally revealed the truth. The dragon's greatest gift had never been its fire. It had been the chance for ordinary people to discover the courage that had quietly lived within them all along. And somewhere beyond the mountains, High Hearth had only 2 sunrises left to remember that lesson. The fire burned low as night settled gently over the Valley of Echoes. Outside the cottage, the lake reflected a sky crowded with stars, each one trembling softly upon the still water until it became impossible to tell where the heavens ended and their reflection began. Inside, no one seemed eager to sleep. Too much had changed. Only that morning, Aldrin had believed the dragon's silence was a mystery waiting to be solved. Now he understood. It was something far heavier. It was a sacrifice, a promise kept at tremendous personal cost. Garrick quietly added another log to the fire. The dragon knows the army is coming. Aldrin nodded. It has known for weeks. And it chose not to fight. No. The old hermit smiled gently. It chose something much harder. Imagine watching people you have protected for centuries. You know they believe you have abandoned them. You know they fear you no longer care. You know that one sweep of your wings could end the danger. He paused, and still. You remain still. Because the promise you made matters more than how others judge you. The room fell silent. Even Thomas had no reply. Aldrin looked down at the dragon's hidden letter. For the first time, he felt less like a scholar reading history and more like someone listening to an old friend explain a painful decision. Morning arrived wrapped in silver mist. After a simple breakfast of oat porridge and fresh honey, Garrick led the travelers away from the cottage. The path wound around the lake before climbing a gentle hill crowned with ancient standing stones. There were 12 in all, each taller than a man, each worn smooth by countless winters. Unlike the carvings beneath High Hearth, these stones contained no pictures, only names, hundreds of them, thousands, perhaps. Aldrin stepped closer. The names stretched across centuries. Some were carved deeply. Others had nearly faded away. "What are these?" Mira asked softly. "The keepers. The rulers?" Garrick shook his head. "No. The rememberers." Aldrin traced one weathered inscription. "The rememberers?" "Every generation," Garrick explained. "One person came from the valley. Not always a king, not always a queen, sometimes a shepherd, sometimes a baker. Once," he smiled, "a remarkably stubborn brewer." Thomas chuckled. "I would have liked to meet that one." "You probably would have. They came here. They learned the promise. They returned home. And they passed it freely to the next generation." Aldrin suddenly understood. It was never meant to belong only to rulers. No. The promise belonged to everyone. "There are gaps." Garrick nodded. "There are." The final section of stone contained only 3 names. After that, nothing. Blank rock. When did it stop? The old man closed his eyes for a moment. About 150 years ago. No one came. Not the next generation, nor the one after. The path was forgotten. The story became legend, and remembrance slowly became admiration. Aldrin whispered the words almost to himself. They remembered the dragon, but forgot why. Its surface was almost untouched, except for a single carving, a lantern, the same symbol they had seen throughout the mountains. He placed one hand against the stone. "This is why I remained, waiting, for someone to return, for someone willing to remember." Mira looked around the circle. "You've been alone all this time?" The old man smiled. "Not entirely." He glanced toward the sky. "I had company." Almost on cue, a broad shadow crossed the meadow. The travelers looked upward. Far above, gliding silently between drifting clouds, the bronze dragon. Aldrin's heart caught. It came here. Of course, it always does. The dragon descended in slow, graceful circles until it landed beyond the standing stones. Not with the earth-shaking impact Aldrin had imagined, almost delicately. The ground barely trembled. For several long moments, no one moved. The dragon was magnificent. Its bronze scales shimmered with hints of green and gold beneath the morning light. Its eyes held a depth impossible to measure. Not merely intelligence, memory. The weight of centuries rested quietly within them. Garrick stepped forward first. The dragon lowered its great head. The old man gently placed a hand against its muzzle. The gesture felt so natural that Aldrin suddenly realized he was witnessing something almost no living person had ever seen. 2 ancient friends greeting one another. No words. None were necessary. The dragon's gaze slowly shifted toward the travelers. Aldrin instinctively bowed, not from fear, from respect. The dragon regarded him for a long moment. Then, it spoke. Its voice was deep, calm, and surprisingly gentle, like distant thunder, softened by rain. "You found the path." Aldrin looked up in astonishment. We did. You remembered. I only followed the clues. The first step of remembrance." The dragon replied, "is choosing to seek." Its words carried no pride, only quiet warmth. Mira stepped forward. "The city believes you've abandoned them." Pain flickered briefly across the dragon's ancient eyes. "I know. Why not tell them? They must choose. If I remove every burden, they inherit only dependence." Thomas swallowed. "But what if they fail?" The dragon remained silent for several moments. When it finally answered, Its voice had grown softer still. Then I will grieve. Not, then they will perish. Not, then I shall destroy the enemy. Simply, I will grieve. The words carried a sorrow deeper than anger could ever reach. Aldrin gathered his courage. Can the promise be renewed? The dragon slowly turned its head toward Garrick. The old hermit smiled. It can. Hope stirred within the group. But, Garrick added gently, not here. The promise was never renewed in secret. It belongs to the people. They must choose it. The city itself must remember. The dragon nodded once, freely. The same word Edric had written centuries before. Freely, never forced, never demanded. Chosen. The dragon unfolded one great wing. Nestled beneath it, rested something wrapped carefully in faded blue cloth. It lowered the bundle before Aldrin. Inside lay an old bronze lantern, simple, unadorned. Its glass had long since clouded with age, yet the metal gleamed as though lovingly polished through countless generations. The first lantern, Garrick whispered, the one from the carvings. The dragon looked at Aldrin. Carry the light home. It has waited long enough. Aldrin accepted the lantern with trembling hands. It was surprisingly warm, as though someone had held it only moments before. The dragon's great eyes rested upon him one final time. Then it turned toward the eastern horizon, toward High Hearth, toward the army gathering beyond the valley, toward a city that still believed its guardian had fallen silent. It had not. It had simply been waiting for its people to remember that courage could not be borrowed forever. Sometimes, it had to be carried home, one small light at a time. For a long moment, no one moved. The bronze lantern rested in Aldrin's hands, warm despite the cool mountain air. It was neither jeweled nor ornate. Time had smoothed its edges, and tiny scratches covered its surface like the countless memories of everyone who had once carried it. It looked ordinary. That, somehow, made it feel even more extraordinary. Thomas peered at it. So, he hesitated. Does it do anything? Aldrin examined it carefully. I've no idea. Garrick smiled. It reminds. Thomas blinked. That's all? The old hermit nodded. That has always been enough. How many children who had grown into old age while the dragon scarcely changed at all? Immortality, he realized, was not merely endless life. It was endless remembering. We should leave immediately, Mira said. The army won't wait. Captain Rowan had estimated they had little more than a day before the third sunrise. Every hour mattered now. Garrick walked with them as far as the edge of the valley. At the final stone marker, he stopped. This is where my task ends. You won't come? Aldrin asked. The old man smiled. I belong to the valley. The city belongs to you. He looked toward the lantern. Don't protect that flame. Share it. Then, before anyone could ask what he meant, he turned and slowly walked back toward the lake. His figure disappeared among the silver birches, without once looking behind him. The return journey moved far more quickly, not because the mountains had grown smaller, because purpose made every step lighter. The travelers scarcely stopped, except to refill their water flasks. Even Thomas, who usually found reasons to admire particularly interesting trees, resisted the temptation. I'll appreciate forests later, he declared, when the kingdom isn't in immediate danger. Mira nodded approvingly. You're becoming efficient. I don't know whether that's a compliment. It is. I think. Scouts. Enemy? She nodded. They've crossed farther west than we expected. They're searching. For what? Mira looked toward the mountains. I don't think they know. They're simply trying not to miss anything. That was somehow more unsettling. An enemy. Searching without fully understanding what it sought could be remarkably dangerous. As evening approached, they climbed the final ridge overlooking High Hearth. The sight stopped every one of them. The Grey Army had surrounded the eastern half of the city. Thousands of tents covered the valley floor. Siege towers stood half-built. Rows of wagons stretched beyond them. Yet, no attack had begun. The city walls still stood untouched. "They're waiting for dawn," Mira whispered. "The third sunrise." Aldrin looked toward the western cliffs. The dragon remained there, exactly where it had been, watching, silent, faithful. His chest tightened. Now he understood. The dragon was not hesitating. It was trusting the people to remember before it was too late. They hurried down the mountain road under the cover of dusk. The western gate opened only after the guards recognized Captain Rowan's signal mirror. The moment Aldrin stepped inside the city, he noticed something had changed. Not the buildings, not the streets, the people. Fear had settled into every conversation. Children no longer played in the squares. Market stalls stood closed. Doors remained open only long enough for neighbors to pass bread or water to one another. No panic, just quiet uncertainty. Brother Corvin met them at the gate. "You found it." His eyes settled upon the lantern. "You truly found it." Aldrin nodded. "And much more." Every seat filled. Many stood along the walls. Aldrin placed the lantern gently upon the center of the great table. Murmurs spread through the room. "It looks ordinary." "It is ordinary." Brother Corvin smiled. "So are promises." Silence followed. Aldrin told them everything. The hidden journal, the standing stones, the rememberers, the dragon's letter, Garrick, the Valley of Echoes. He spoke for nearly an hour. No one interrupted. When he finished, the room remained utterly still. Finally, an elderly potter stood. "So, we've been thanking the dragon for protecting us, while forgetting we were meant to protect one another." "Yes," Aldrin answered softly. The potter lowered his head. "I think we owe someone an apology. If the promise is renewed, will the dragon destroy the army?" Aldrin hesitated. "I don't know." Brother Corvin answered instead. "I don't believe that's the right question." "What is?" He looked around the hall. "The promise was never about asking the dragon to save us. It was about becoming the sort of people worth saving." The words settled over the gathering like gentle rain. One by one, people began to understand. A baker spoke first. "I'll feed every guard on the walls." A blacksmith nodded. "My forge stays lit through the night." A healer added, "I'll prepare every bandage we possess." A farmer stood. "My wagons can carry water." Another voice followed. "I'll help reinforce the gates." Then another, "And I'll carry stones." Within moments, the hall buzzed with quiet determination, not because someone had ordered them, because they had chosen freely. Outside, lanterns began appearing throughout High Hearth, not as signals of alarm, as reminders. Families placed them in windows. Craftsmen hung them above their workshops. Children carried tiny lamps through the streets, while their parents smiled gently. Aldrin stepped outside the council hall. From the highest tower to the humblest cottage, warm points of light slowly spread across the city. The first lantern remained on the council table. Yet its purpose had already begun. It had reminded. Nothing more, nothing less. Far above, the dragon lifted its head. For the first time in many days, its great bronze wings stirred, not in flight, just once. As though, somewhere deep within an ancient promise, something long asleep had begun to awaken. Night settled over High Hearth like a great velvet cloak, but unlike the fearful evenings of the days before, this one glowed with hundreds of small lights. Lanterns shone from nearly every window. Some were polished brass. Some were simple clay lamps. Others were little more than candles tucked safely inside old glass jars. No one had been instructed to light them. No decree had been issued. The people had simply chosen. Aldrin stood atop the western wall with Brother Corvin, watching the warm constellation of lights spread through the city. "It isn't the lantern itself," Aldrin said quietly. "No," Corvin smiled. "It never was. It's what it reminds people to do." Below them, neighbors carried bundles of firewood to elderly widows who lived alone. Apprentices hauled buckets of water without being asked. Bakers delivered bread to the watchmen, refusing payment. Small acts, ordinary acts. Yet together, they seemed to transform the city more profoundly than any speech ever could. Captain Rowan wasted no time. "The eastern gate needs another beam." Within minutes, 20 carpenters arrived. "The northern wall requires more stone." Dozens of masons appeared. "The infirmary needs blankets." Families emptied their linen chests. No one asked whose responsibility it was. No one waited for permission. The dragon had protected them for generations. Now, at last, they were protecting one another. Before dawn, the gray army stirred. Trumpets echoed across the valley. Campfires were extinguished one by one. Long ranks of soldiers formed with practiced precision. From the walls, the movement resembled a dark tide gathering before crashing against the shore. Captain Rowan surveyed the valley. "They're coming." The words carried no panic, only certainty. Archers took their places. Shield walls formed behind the gates. Blacksmiths carried spare spearheads to waiting soldiers. Healers arranged herbs, clean cloth, and warm water. Every person in the city seemed to have found a purpose. Aldrin remembered the dragon's hidden message. "Fire may frighten away wolves. Fire cannot plant fields. Wings may shield a city. Wings cannot teach hearts courage." For the first time, he truly understood. The enemy advanced, slowly, deliberately. Their gray banners fluttered in the morning breeze, still blank, still nameless. When they reached bowshot, they stopped. A single figure rode forward beneath a white flag. The same messenger. He held another scroll. Captain Rowan descended to the gate. This time, Aldrin accompanied him. The messenger bowed politely. "You have reached the third sunrise." "I have." "Will the gates open?" Captain Rowan answered calmly. "No." The messenger nodded, almost as though expecting the reply. He handed over the scroll anyway. Inside were only 6 words. "Then let the old judgment begin." Nothing more. The rider turned without waiting for a response and returned to the army. Aldrin frowned. "Judgment?" Brother Corvin quietly repeated the word. "Not battle. Judgment." Every eye turned instinctively toward the western cliffs. The dragon still stood there, motionless. The first volley of arrows darkened the sky. Captain Rowan raised his arm. "Shields!" Wood thudded. Iron rang. The walls held. A second volley followed. Then a third. The siege towers crept steadily closer. Still, the dragon did not move. Aldrin's heart pounded. Please. Not because he wanted the dragon to fight, because he feared the people would lose faith before the promise fully awakened. Then something unexpected happened. A young apprentice beside Aldrin noticed a frightened child standing alone on the wall. Without hesitation, he lowered his own shield over the child instead of himself. Moments later, another guard stepped forward to cover the apprentice. Then another. The movement spread naturally along the battlements. No commands, no hesitation. Each person protecting the next, like links in a chain. Brother Corvin smiled. "Look." Aldrin looked. He finally saw it. The promise had never been words. It had always been action, freely chosen, passed from one person to another, exactly as the rememberers had intended. Across the city, similar moments unfolded. A merchant abandoned his own wagon to help rescue a trapped horse. Children carried water to exhausted defenders. Neighbors opened their homes to complete strangers. No one spoke of heroism. They simply did what needed doing. Above them, the dragon watched. Its ancient eyes followed every act of quiet courage. Its great head slowly lifted. The siege towers reached the walls. Grappling hooks flew through the air. Ladders slammed against stone. The first enemy soldiers began climbing. Captain Rowan drew his sword. "Hold!" The defenders met the assault. Steel rang against steel. The clash echoed across the valley. Aldrin, armed with nothing more dangerous than determination and a remarkably sturdy walking staff, discovered that even scholars could be surprisingly effective at shoving ladders away from walls. One particularly determined invader climbed halfway up before Thomas cheerfully informed him, "I'm terribly sorry about this," then pushed the ladder backward. The soldier landed in a hay cart someone had abandoned earlier. He appeared more offended than injured. Even battles, it seemed, occasionally allowed a little dignity to survive. Suddenly, the lantern. The first lantern, resting within the council hall. Its flame brightened. No one had touched it. Its warm glow spread through the windows, spilling across the streets below. One by one, every lantern in High Hearth answered, not with magical fire, with ordinary flames burning just a little brighter. Golden light flowed through the city like a quiet river. The defenders noticed. So did the attackers. Even Captain Rowan paused. Brother Corvin whispered softly, "It remembers." High upon the western cliff, the dragon unfolded its wings, not in anger, not with a roar, slowly, magnificently. For the first time since the army had entered the valley, it stepped forward. One deliberate pace, then another. The ancient promise, asleep for generations, had finally awakened. And every soul in High Hearth felt it, not as power descending from the sky, but as a quiet certainty rising from within themselves. The dragon had not come to replace their courage. It had come because they had remembered it first. A hush fell across the battlefield. It lasted only a heartbeat. Yet to everyone standing upon the walls of High Hearth, it felt as though time itself had paused to watch what would happen next. The dragon stood upon the western cliff, its wings spread wide enough to catch the first rays of the rising sun. Golden light washed across its bronze scales until it seemed less like a creature of flesh and bone and more like a living piece of the mountain itself. No roar came, no torrent of fire, only a single, measured breath. The Grey Army hesitated. Even their commanders appeared uncertain. They had marched toward a city expecting either surrender or a beast that would descend in fury. Instead, they found something altogether different. A people standing together, and a dragon that waited. Captain Rowan lowered his sword slightly. "Hold your positions." No one charged. No one pursued. The defenders remained exactly where they belonged, upon the walls, protecting their home rather than seeking glory. Brother Corvin smiled faintly. "It remembers." Aldrin realized the old monk was not speaking about the dragon. He was speaking about the city. Across the valley, a figure emerged from the enemy ranks. Unlike the previous messengers, this rider wore a long gray cloak embroidered with the familiar spiral enclosed within a circle, the ancient symbol. He rode alone toward the space between the city and the army. There he dismounted and planted a tall staff into the earth. Its banner was plain white. Captain Rowan looked toward Aldrin. "I believe this meeting belongs to you." Aldrin swallowed. "I've never negotiated with an invading army." Brother Corvin chuckled softly. Neither had King Edric. That was unexpectedly reassuring, in the sense that falling into a river is reassuring because at least you know other people have done it before. Accompanied by Captain Rowan and Mira, Aldrin walked beyond the gate beneath a flag of truce. The grey-cloaked rider waited patiently. He was older than Aldrin had expected. His beard was neatly trimmed, his posture perfectly straight. His expression carried neither anger nor arrogance, only weary determination. "You carry the first lantern," the stranger observed. "I do." Then the stories were true. "You know those stories?" The man inclined his head. "My people never forgot them." Aldrin frowned. "Who are your people?" The stranger looked toward the mountains before answering. "We were once the Western Keepers." "The Western Rememberers?" A slow nod. "When the kingdoms divided generations ago, so did the Guardians of the Promise." His voice carried genuine sadness. "Our path was lost. So was yours. We remembered only half." Aldrin felt a chill, half a memory, half a truth. Sometimes those were more dangerous than complete ignorance. The stranger continued. "Our ancestors believed the dragon belonged to all the valleys. When your city ceased renewing the promise, they believed the covenant had ended. So they came to claim what they thought had been abandoned. They wanted to command the dragon? No." He shook his head immediately. "To possess its protection. There is a difference." Aldrin wasn't entirely convinced there was much of one. He carefully removed Edric's journal from his satchel, then the dragon's hidden letter. Finally, he lifted the first lantern. The promise was never about ownership. It was about responsibility. The dragon protected those who first protected one another. The stranger listened without interruption. Aldrin finished by reading the dragon's own words aloud. "Wings may shield a city. Wings cannot teach heart's courage." Silence settled across the valley. The wind stirred the white banner, gently. At last, the grey-cloaked man closed his eyes. "We forgot that part." His shoulders seemed suddenly lighter, or perhaps simply older. "For generations we believed only the dragon mattered. We remembered the Guardian. We forgot the purpose." Aldrin smiled sadly. "So did we, because they sensed something greater than battle unfolding before them." High upon the western cliff, the dragon watched. It made no move to interfere. This choice belonged to humans, as it always had. And laid the sword upon the ground. "I cannot ask my people to fight for a misunderstanding." He looked toward Aldrin. "Nor can I ask yours to forgive one immediately. But I can end this." Captain Rowan stared. "So easily." The stranger smiled faintly. "It has taken 150 years. I would hardly call that easy." A single horn sounded, then another. Across the valley, grey banners slowly lowered. Rows of soldiers stepped back. Siege towers stopped moving. The long line of advancing troops came to a gradual halt. Confused murmurs spread through the ranks, but discipline held. No one charged, no one protested. The order rippled outward like circles upon a quiet pond. Retreat. Only then did the dragon move. With one powerful beat of its wings, it descended from the cliff. The sound rolled across the valley like distant thunder. Every soldier, friend and former enemy alike, looked upward. The dragon landed not before the city, not before the retreating army, exactly between them. It folded its wings, then lowered its great head, not to one side, to both. An acknowledgement, equal, impartial. Its deep voice carried effortlessly across the valley. "The promise remembers those." It paused. "Who remember one another." Nothing more. No speech. No proclamation. The simplicity somehow made the words impossible to forget. The grey-cloaked leader bowed deeply. Captain Rowan did the same. One by one, soldiers throughout the valley followed. Not because anyone commanded them, because it felt right. Aldrin noticed something remarkable. The dragon never looked triumphant, only relieved, as though a burden carried for generations had finally grown lighter. The first lantern glowed warmly in Aldrin's hands. Its flame flickered once, then settled into a calm, steady light. No brighter than before, just peaceful. The valley had been spared, not by fire, not by conquest, but by remembering a promise that neither side had fully understood until that very morning. And as the first companies of the Grey Army quietly turned toward home, the people of High Hearth realized that the greatest victory they had ever witnessed contained almost no fighting at all. It had simply required someone willing to carry an old light back into the world. The valley grew quiet once more. Not immediately. Armies, much like flocks of particularly stubborn geese, required a surprising amount of time to decide they were truly leaving. Orders traveled from captain to captain. Wagons turned slowly. Horses were gathered. Campfires were carefully extinguished until only thin wisps of smoke drifted into the clear afternoon sky. From the walls of High Hearth, the people watched in silence, not with celebration, not with mockery, only with relief. Captain Rowan rested both hands upon the stone battlements and let out a long breath. "I've never been happier to watch someone walk away." Thomas nodded. "I've also never been happier to discover I won't need to push another ladder." "You seemed rather good at it." "I was beginning to worry that would become my reputation." The legendary ladder pusher. "I had hoped for something more heroic." Mira smiled. "I think surviving suits you better." The dragon remained in the valley. For the first time in living memory, it walked through the fields instead of circling high above them. Its great claws pressed gently into the earth. Wildflowers bent beneath its passing and slowly rose again after it had gone. Children watched from behind their parents, peeking around cloaks with enormous eyes. One little boy tugged nervously at his mother's sleeve. "May I wave?" His mother hesitated, then nodded. The child lifted one tiny hand. The dragon stopped. It looked toward him, and just as it had done countless mornings from the sky, it slowly inclined one great wing. The boy laughed with such delight that every lingering shadow seemed to vanish from the valley. Some traditions, Aldrin thought, deserved to last forever. The city gates opened wide, not for an army, for their guardian. People gathered along the streets, leaving a broad path clear. No one shouted, no one rushed forward. Respect needed no noise. The dragon entered High Hearth for the first time in centuries. Aldrin noticed something extraordinary. The creature moved carefully. It lowered its head to avoid old archways. It folded its wings whenever the streets narrowed. It stepped around flower beds with surprising precision. Apparently, even ancient dragons understood that gardeners could be remarkably protective of their roses. Brother Corvin chuckled softly. "I always suspected that." "You suspected dragons liked flowers?" "I suspected they preferred avoiding disappointed gardeners." An excellent survival instinct. The people simply gathered, old and young, farmers and merchants, children and craftsmen. After a long silence, the dragon spoke. Its deep voice echoed gently among the rooftops. When Edric climbed the mountain, he believed he came to ask for salvation. It was not salvation, he found. It was responsibility. The city listened. I remained because each generation chose to remember. When remembrance faded, I could still protect your walls, but not your promise. Its great eyes drifted across the gathered crowd. You have remembered. Not me. Each other. Aldrin saw tears shining in more than one pair of eyes, not from sadness, from understanding. Brother Corvin stepped forward, carrying a blank ledger, not an ancient journal, not a royal decree, simply a well-made book with fresh parchment waiting to be written upon. He placed it beside the lantern. "What is that?" Thomas whispered. "A beginning," Corvin replied. He dipped a quill into ink. Upon the first page, he wrote a single title, The Book of Rememberers. Then he signed his name. Not because he was the most important person present, because someone had to write first. One by one, others followed. Captain Rowan, Lady Miriam, the baker, the blacksmith, the healer, the shepherd who had first seen the distant signal fires. Parents signed beside children, friends beside neighbors, not as a pledge to obey a dragon, as a promise to care for one another, freely, always freely. Aldrin added his own name near the bottom of the first page. For once, he felt less like a recorder of history than a small part of it. As evening approached, Garrick appeared quietly at the edge of the square. No one had seen him enter the city. Somehow, that seemed entirely appropriate. The dragon looked toward its old friend. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. They simply smiled. Yes, even dragons could smile. It was subtle, barely noticeable, more in the eyes than the mouth. But it was there. Garrick bowed. "My waiting is over." The dragon lowered its head. "So is mine." Together they walked toward the western gate. The people parted silently to let them pass. At the edge of the city, Garrick stopped. "You won't stay?" Aldrin asked. The old hermit looked back one final time. The promise no longer needs a keeper. It has rememberers again. He turned toward the mountains. The dragon followed. Not because it was leaving forever, because some friendships were older than cities and deserved an evening walk together. Years passed. The story of the Grey Army became less frightening with each retelling. Children remembered it as the day everyone lit lanterns. Gardeners insisted the dragons still admired their flowers. Thomas never entirely escaped being called the legendary ladder pusher, though eventually he admitted it was a respectable title. The Book of Rememberers slowly filled with names. Each generation added its own, never by command, always by choice. The first lantern remained in the council hall. Its flame was carefully tended, not because anyone believed it possessed magical power, but because it reminded them of something far more precious. Promises survive only when ordinary people decide they matter. As for Aldrin, he wrote the fullest account anyone had ever assembled of the city's history. He included the battles that never happened, the dragon that chose restraint over glory, the people who rediscovered courage they had unknowingly possessed all along. And one sentence he placed at the very end of his manuscript. The city was never protected by a dragon alone. It was protected by neighbors who remembered why the dragon had come in the first place. Travelers still arrived at High Hearth with the same astonished expressions. They would inevitably look toward the mountains. Someone nearby would smile. "Oh," a local would say with complete confidence. "Evening patrol." And almost always, just as the sun slipped behind the western peaks, a familiar bronze shadow would glide peacefully across the sky. Not because the city needed rescuing, but because old promises, faithfully remembered, often become the quietest and most comforting parts of everyday life. The night grows still now, and the road becomes softer beneath the imagination than beneath any pair of boots. The mountains rest beneath a blanket of silver moonlight, their sharp edges mellowed by distance, while the valley sleeps with the easy confidence of a place that has learned where true safety begins. Somewhere high above, slow wings drift through cool evening air without hurry. Below, warm lanterns glow in windows, one after another, not as warnings, but as gentle reminders that kindness is brightest when shared. The fields sway peacefully. The rivers continue their endless songs. And every stone along the old path quietly remembers the footsteps that passed before. Perhaps that is the nicest thought to carry into sleep. Not that dragons exist, though it is pleasant to imagine they might. Not that ancient promises are written in forgotten languages, but that the smallest acts of care, a loaf of bread shared, a helping hand offered, a light left burning for someone returning home, can become traditions strong enough to outlast fear itself. So let the mountains fade into the darkness, let the lanterns become tiny stars, and let the bronze guardian continue its unhurried circle through the night sky. There is nothing left to fear here. Only quiet fields, peaceful hearts, faithful friends, and a promise that has finally found its way home. May your own evening be every bit as calm. May your dreams be gentle, and may you always find your way toward a light that welcomes you.